Now, first of all, I want to find out what each of the three of you are doing. What's the latest thing you're doing actually in this area? And then let's get on to sort of try and unpick this issue we have. All right, so why don't we start with Dale? What are you up to?
Well, how long you got?
A couple of minutes.
All right. So we just built our first project to turn grass into gas, and this is a major thing. We've got to change how we heat our homes in Britain to get to net zero. We've pioneered a new way to do that, growing grass, turning it into gas, and putting it into the gas main. We've just completed a different project in the lab to take protein from grass so that humans can eat it, so that for the first time ever we can make energy and food from the same piece of land. And there's enough grass in our country to make enough gas for all of our homes and twice the protein that we all eat every year as a nation. So there's a fantastic resource right under our feet here that we're working on.
It's amazing. A round of applause. Amazing stuff, amazing stuff. And you've been putting a stage together here talking about great stuff too in the environment. Claire, I mean, it's an amazing privilege to have you here. I mean, XR has been fantastic, amazing, and it really raised awareness. But it's also, it's doing a lot still. I mean, I remember what you did at Tufton Street, what you were doing down at the presses, the Murdoch presses. These are obviously all things that Byline get extremely excited about. What's the latest? What are you up to at the moment?
Well, so Extinction Rebellion are planning an occupation at Windsor.
Who's there? Who's at Windsor? Is it the Great Park? Are we talking lions or other types of beasts?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because the occupation is really about citizens' assemblies and about deliberative democracy and getting different people to use different processes to come to different decisions. And that's the part of XR's strategy that I think has probably gained the least traction out of the entire thing. People sort of go, you're the alarm people. And we're like, no, we're not. We're the solution people as well. And so XR's pushing on that. There's lots of people doing work on the ground on community assemblies through Extinction Rebellion. I'm also working on a project called the Humanity Project, which is trying to help to set up a wave of locally self-organised assemblies so people are creating the democratic space for themselves.
And I want to come back to assemblies because this could be a good way to skewer these politicians, I think. But anyway, let's get better. Christabel, I'm really proud to be a supporter of Earthed, which I think is fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've set up here?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So last year we launched a new platform called Earthed, which is a charity platform. It's based on the belief that possibly enough people know and care about the climate and ecological crisis. And the issue isn't so much about awareness or care, but it's about a lack of technical capacity, as in access to skills to actually do something about it. And by doing, I'm talking about nature restoration. So through Earth, we're trying to democratize access to high quality education on permaculture, soil restoration, community-supported agriculture, river restoration, corals, and everything in between, and enabling people to access a community forum and then eventually funds as well in order to start.
And you have great videos, and I mean, what I love about it is there's all sorts of case studies of what people are doing and positive things that people are doing that you can take up. So we have three people here. I just please hear it for Christabel and what she's doing. Thank you. In my wildest moments, I imagine what would happen if the three of you were in government. Just say the three of you were in government together and you were actually sorting all this out. I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here, would we? Things would be happening. We'd all be doing things. So, each three of you are doing really practical, really important things. They're all slightly different, but really big things. But I don't see the same sense of ambition from politicians. Why do we think that is?
Money.
Dale, you must come up against government quite a bit. What's the sort of reaction you get from this amazing stuff you're doing?
Well, I think it's really important to reflect or acknowledge that we've got a new government now. It's barely 3 weeks old. So all of our feelings about government inaction, government corruption, all the things that we've lived with for the last 14 years at least, we've got to let them fall away. Have we got a government that's ambitious? I think we do, actually.
Yeah.
Did I come up against government? Yes, the Tory government. What was it like? Well, they just weren't listening. I think we all experienced that. They didn't listen to Just Stop Oil, did they, for example? In fact, they went the opposite direction. But everything's changed from my perspective. We're 3 weeks into a new government, and they seem to me to be very ambitious.
And have you had dealings with the new government at all, discussions with them?
Yeah, I've had some chats about stuff like the grass program that we're working on and other policy ideas. You know, there's some reforms of the energy market that we've been suggesting for a while and that kind of stuff. And I know that they get the whole green economic opportunity. And you'll have seen them, they move really early, unbanned onshore wind, unblocked some major solar projects from the system, banned the bee-killing nicotinoid, I think it is, I never say the word right, neonics is a better way to describe it. They banned that straight out the gates as well. I mean, I think they've been making a lot of change. I think they really do get it. They've said they're willing to face down the NIMBYs when it comes to pylons and onshore wind turbines. I mean, that's an exceptional thing to hear a government say. And even on the question of Israel and Palestine, they've gone their own direction away from the US. They haven't objected to the arrest warrant for Netanyahu, which I think is also exceptional.
They did row back on the 28 billion, though, that they were committing to green industries. They did pull back on that, didn't they?
Some months ago, yes, absolutely. And it's the one thing everybody says, but, you know, they rode back on that. But if you look back at that time, what they did and said, I thought made great sense because the pledge itself was 2 years old. It was made at a different time in our economy. The election was an unknown distance away at that time, and they simply said, we won't commit to spending money that we don't know that we'll have. And to have done so would have gifted the right-wing press and the Conservative Party a weapon in the election. They took that away.
So, Christabel, I mean, you look globally, don't you? You're not just looking at the UK. And do you think this is a global issue with governments generally?
Yeah, definitely. There's not many examples I have where I'm seeing governments taking the kind of action that we want. I do feel really strongly, though, that we're often looking to governments and asking and demanding change, which obviously we need to be doing in all the different forms of activism, all the different beautiful manifestations of it. And at the same time, I feel like we have a cognitive dissonance in that the people who care most, the people who are demanding the change, how much are we actually actively participating in creating the kinds of societies, cultures, and ways of life that we are seeking from others? And that's a space that I'm really sort of honing in on and focusing myself. It's definitely not the only space, but I think there is so much potential we have as humanity to shift out of this conception that environmentalism is about sustainable consumerism, about not flying, not eating meat, not doing all these things. That is a part of it, but for me, more powerful is our human potential to be ecological citizens, to be going out and restoring the rivers ourselves, to be creating community-supported agriculture, to be rewilding our roofs, our back gardens, our balconies, the grassy verges on our streets, to be harvesting rainwater. There is so much that we can do that sort of transcends this consumerist or don't do this to like the full way in which we are embodying what it means to be alive. So that's very much the space that I care a lot about, because I think otherwise I find it very strange constantly demanding from people who don't care what I want when I'm not doing it myself.
So there's a lot more we can do ourselves in that way. I do, which I think is really important, and all those things do add up, definitely. But I also feel, Claire, that you're going to be more in the camp of perhaps the existing political structure has problems with it. I know the original sort of XR sort of points were that if you get, was it 3.5% of the population to be actively seeking change, then that will be enough.
So that research was by an academic called Erica Chenworth, and she researches uprisings, resistance, when regimes get overthrown, and sometimes violently, sometimes non-violently. So she studied across the board and found that if a campaign reached 3.5% of the population being active participant, that was the sort of the highest level that you would need. Actually, statistically, I think the civil rights in America was about 1% of people in active work, right? So you don't need the entire nation to have a moment of conversion and become part of the movement, but you do need quite a substantial number of people to take
And that
part.
puts enough pressure on government, does it, to force
Well,
change?
yeah, I think that's what it looks like from the research, and obviously there's different outcomes depending on which route you take. If you take a violent route, you may need fewer people, but you are far more likely to have a shittier outcome further down the line, because you might win, but you've damaged the fabric of society so much that you eventually lose. So you'll eventually get autocracy or fascism or some, surge of something that's not actually what the what the revolutionaries sort of planned for in the first instance. But I think, XR did do amazingly well at having this kind of momentum strategy for getting a lot of people involved. And I think whilst we've got this sort of very organised, quite sophisticated and substantial climate movement in this country, a lot of us are now feeling that we understand disruption works, that it's necessary, that it's effective, but we also sort of trying to build the constructive elements as well. And, at the moment, for me, thinking about the political challenges that are ahead of the Labour Party, for example, it's not just that there's loads of stuff that they've got to unpick or that they've got to move quickly to change, but they've inherited like a very polarised, very damaged nation of people who are, massively sort of swinging in favour of reform. You've got Farage in the Houses of Parliament now. That will be completely emboldening to him, and he's such a fucking good orator. And, that it's serious, that what's just happened in France, what's happened in Germany, the rise of the far right is real. It's really, really worrying. Neoliberal kind of sticking plasters over stuff I don't think is going to work long term. You're going to have the sort of Biden effect where you buy yourself a few years, people chill out, and then they go, oh, fuck, here comes Trump. So I think we're in that circumstance. And when we launched XR, we said, the conditions of climate breakdown are the conditions that are going to lead you to fascism, because there's going to be mass migration, because there's going to be shortage of resources, because people are going to shit their pants, and then loads of people will go and vote for the big strong man who's got a simple message. And so it's still, although we've got a new government now, I think it's still a very serious threat to us long term. And that's, for me, what the climate movement, when we started XR, was saying, was like, we have to be preemptively anti-fascist as well as like saying this is an emergency and there's like practical shit that we have to get on with, because we're headed for collapse, and we are still on course for collapse globally, and I think it's going to happen much sooner than most people realise. And in that circumstance, I hope that by setting up lots and lots of local assemblies, that people have got agency, they've got the skills and the tools that they need to be able to have difficult conversations and to disagree in healthy ways without tearing each other apart or voting for a fascist.
Very good. Very good, Claire. And let's come back to assemblies and things in a moment. But Dale, I'm sort of conscious of the fact that you've taken a much more practical approach, really. I mean, I think there's probably a real confluence of what everyone thinks about, the importance everybody thinks about the climate emergency and why we have to get on and do stuff. But I mean, you've managed to do these amazing things, but also do it within the construct of current society and capitalism, make it sustainable. I mean, I have the clue how you managed to pull it off, actually, but would you like to give me a bit of just a bit of backstory about how you decided to do this and your approach, really?
Yeah, sure thing, thanks. So look, I spent the whole of the decade of the 80s living on the road. I was a New Age traveller. I was at the Battle of the Beanfield, and if any of you have heard of that, it was a massive police brutality event just after the bashing of the coal miners and that kind of stuff. On the road, we pursued different ways to live. Not all of us, but many of us pursued different ways to live. I had a little windmill powering my trailer by the end of the 80s, and I was parked up on a hill outside Stroud, and I had an epiphany that I could spend another 10 years living a low-impact lifestyle myself, or I could drop back in and try and build a big windmill on the hill, and that's how it all began. It took me about 5 years, and in the process, I realized I had to go further and start an energy company to reach the end user and get a fair price for the power, so I started Ecotricity. It was the world's first green energy company. I didn't know that at the time. And then we began by pursuing energy, trying to change the way electricity was made in our country, because it was the biggest single driver of the climate crisis. and actually left gas behind. I'll come back to gas in a minute. And then in the early 2000s, we went looking for the second and third biggest cause of the climate crisis and found it was transport and food. And so our mission became about energy, transport, and food. 80% of all of our personal carbon emissions, excuse me, come from those three things: how we power ourselves, how we travel, and what we eat. And so we've been working on those issues since then. I should say, at the beginning of all of this, I decided to use business as a tool to bring about change, as opposed to any other different model to make this happen. So I'm in business, but I'm not a business person. We're a not-for-dividend company. All of the money we make goes back into our mission, and we've grown to be an 800-strong people team. We built Britain's first electric car. That was our foray into transport. Back in 2010. Then we built the electric highway, a national network of charging points for the cars that weren't really on the road back then. We got into food. We rescued our local football club, which gave us a platform to talk about plant-based living and all of the other sustainability stuff we've done in energy, transport, and food. And now we make school dinners. We're in 5,000 schools with plant-based school dinners. We've got a Ministry of Eco-Education. We're in half of all primary schools in Britain talking about sustainability with an actual curriculum that's themed on sustainability. We make diamonds from atmospheric carbon. We make small windmills. We do a whole bunch of different things, but it's all about the same thing. It's all about saying to people, to get to net zero, to get to green living, whatever it is that you want to call it, we don't have to give stuff up. We just have to find another way to do things. And we've been pioneering those different ways to do things for about 30 years now.
So all three of you are doing actually quite mind-boggling things. But I do want to ask you all a question now, before we move on, is, do you think that we underestimate the scale of what we've got to do, and perhaps the lack of time we have to do it? I'll start with you, Christabel. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. The reason why we started Earth is because, well, I fell in love with ecosystem restoration after being very disillusioned and burnt out. And just fell in love with how it can heal community, it can heal your own relationship with nature, and it can heal, the water we drink, the air we breathe, etc. But according to the UN, by the end of this decade, 1 billion hectares need to be restored. I don't like saying that fact because it feels like just too big. But it's really important for us to know that even if politicians are listening, even if they're working, there isn't the infrastructure to be able to restore from the bottom up that amount of land. And so communities, local people everywhere need to be resourced, supported, enabled to actively participate in the restoration of those environments. Claire was mentioning before about 1% being actively involved in a movement. It's like that active participation that I think we underestimate, and we think it's about understanding the problem, calling out the issues, talking about it, storytelling. I think has been an incredible, powerful tool, but now I think we underestimate that journey from storytelling all the way to how we are actually living and interacting in our environments. And the last thing I'll say on this is that we are so, everyone says it now, but so disconnected from nature that relationship is so weak and tenuous that I think if we were actively participating in restoring our local river, we would be a lot more powerful in the way that we demanded for sewage not to be entering it, because you'd be seeing it, you would be seeing the work that you've done being reversed, and you would have skin in the game kind of thing. I think we're so passively letting so much happen that is a massive reason why we're not necessarily sustaining ourselves in the movement building. And so for me, it's very much about exploring what are the solutions and how can we all actively participate whilst demanding it from the top down. But if we're not doing it from the bottom up, I don't really know if we've got a chance.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Christabel. You mentioned a couple of things which I think Claire's picked up, which is community and obviously time running out. But I think, Claire, we are seeing this collapse is already happening. It's already here. I mean, we look at places like Pakistan where perhaps, half the population is being affected by climate change at the moment in terms of driving them into, abject poverty and hunger. We're seeing, collapse of all around the world, really, going on. Sometimes I just wonder if you feel we sit in this slightly privileged sort of country where, we're not really seeing the effects of this in some ways, although we are seeing seasons change, but we're not seeing the collapse. I mean, we know that probably 50% of migration around the world is due to climate change. I mean, we look out this window that seems quite privileged, but we don't seem to see the world, just what is happening around us. Do you think?
Yeah, totally. And I think, I was just talking to somebody backstage about the CFCs crisis and how, when I was young, when I was at school and I learnt about CFCs and what they were doing, and, then when you learn about that in your science lesson, you get taught, oh, they actually discovered this in the 70s or the 60s. And you think, fuck me, how is it possible that 20, 30 years on from understanding that if you spray this shit in the sky, you're going to make a hole in it and it's going to be deadly to humans, how can decades go by with that best available information right there and nobody acting on it? And I think, there are lots of things that people aren't talking about the climate. People that I'm in touch with who are trying to work out how to get a conversation on the go about the slowing down of the AMOC. If you don't know what AMOC stands for, go and look up what that phenomenon is. It's it includes the Gulf Stream, but there's a point in climate change where the future goes beyond us getting hotter and into total polar temperatures sweeping Northern Europe, making it impossible to grow anything ever again that feasible and scalable that we can all eat. It's Northern Europe is absolutely fucked and it doesn't know it because no one's talking about the extreme risks. And this has been a constant thing for me. In 2018, I read this paper called What Lies Beneath, which was a paper by a guy called Spratt from Australia, but the foreword was by this scientist, Schellenhuber. Read the foreword to that and you will, and a light bulb came on for me that was when you're in extreme risk, it doesn't need to be important how likely it is. That's not the important metric. The important metric is how fucked is the end of that tail of risk. And if the end of that tail of risk is total extinction, then you don't take even a 0.005% chance of that risk. You don't do that in insurance. You don't build bridges that have a high percentage chance of collapsing. You don't get on planes that might crash. You don't do these things. But we have done the wrong risk analysis on this issue, and we continue to do it massively because the media don't tell anyone. The Climate Change Committee report includes there's an extreme risk here with the AMOC collapse and it would be catastrophic and we think it's a small chance but we don't know when it's going to happen. It's destabilising now. People are absolutely petrified who are paying attention to that issue, and it just comes and goes in a moment in the news cycle and no one really understands what they're risking, So when we go on TV and go, we're headed for collapse and we're terrified and food systems are going to break, most of the people in that media class are so fucking privileged that they don't actually think anything's going to harm them anyway, because they're well, it might get a bit worse for poor people, but, the general analysis is I'll probably be basically fine. And you won't. No one's going to be fucking fine. So, it's a total disaster. And because we seem incapable of getting to grips with, the public information space, it's a fucking mess. The internet's not made it better, it's actually made it kind of worse. Someone said to me recently, it's compare it to when the printing presses came in, and the second most popular book you could buy was about how to spot a witch. We're in that time now, but with digital media instead of people giving out printed nonsense, So it is a massive issue, because if people understood what they were giving up by not actually doing the things that we need to do and not coming together around this stuff, I'm certain if people had a real grasp of what was actually at risk, there'd be a lot more passion.
It might be back to communities as well, the resilience you're building in communities. And Dale, I was very interested by what you say is use business as a sort of weapon, as it were, a tool.
Or a tool.
I meant a weapon, sorry, a tool. But, you don't strike me as a conventional business person. And, obviously understanding, the backstory you gave us. And and obviously you're not waiting for any governments or anyone to sort things out. You're going there and sorting it out yourself. But it must be very hard because you must be aware of the scale of the problem and the scale of this collapse. Sometimes when you sort of wake up and think, am I doing enough? How can I do enough? Is it worth all this effort when I can see this sort of tidal wave of collapse in front of me? I just wonder if you have those sort of feelings and those worries, really.
I always wonder if I'm doing enough, but that's just the way I'm built. I don't worry about a tidal wave of problems. I can see what's happening, but I see a very simple picture. The interlinked climate crisis, global wildlife crisis, and human health crisis affecting us are driven by two things: the mass burning of fossil fuels and the mass consumption of farm animals. Just those two things. So all we have to do collectively, actually, to unwind most of the problems we face, is stop two things: stop burning fossil fuels, stop eating animals. Cognitive dissonance got mentioned here today. I think it's really important. In my experience, people that care about the environment and people that care about animals have a blind spot. I like to think of it as the cow in the room. So how many people here, right? How many people here are plant-based, including the panel? Hands up. Wow. Wow. You're driving the climate crisis and the decline of nature in our country. And we can talk about the things that should be done by governments. We can talk about citizens' assemblies. And all of that is good stuff. But we are not walking the walk in this tent collectively. We're not.
That's very challenging thought for us there. Absolutely. Sorry, just trying to process that. Sorry, Dale, because we do, as you say, we need to walk the talk. We do need to walk the talk. Though coming back to governments for a moment, because I completely understand what you're saying. Why is it that when we had the election, when you looked at people's policies and what they were talking about, I know there was elements of what you're talking about in the Labour Party policy, but it wasn't up the top, wasn't it? It wasn't the top priority, really, when they were talking about the election. I mean, why do we think that is? Sorry, I'm not looking at anyone in particular. Just jump on the...
I mean, since 2019, there's been a really successful counter-strategy to ours, and you've got to bear in mind that people who work in think tanks in Tufton Street, the Atlas think tank network, people who have a huge influence over our politics, they've read Gene Sharp, they've looked at Bill Moyer's movement studies, they do the same research as us. In fact, there's like a lot of far-right mobilising happening at the moment around culture and community organising, and if you see what they're putting out, they're saying things like work at the speed of trust. I mean, literally, like the other side are getting mobilised around a lot of our strategies and tactics, which is quite frightening. But there's definitely been a huge success in the sort of what I would say is like a dual push. One push on legislation change and one big push on the identity of activists, and particularly people that are willing to sacrifice their freedoms. And many of you will have heard about these like incredible sentences that were handed down to people in Just Stop Oil a couple of weeks ago, and those sentences have been facilitated by a consistent campaign through the tabloid media to turn activists into people that are othered, that are not like you, that don't care about your needs, that are selfish, that are idiots, that are posh, that are fucking whatever. And that, the success of that is also something I think that then has probably affected what the political parties feel that they can do and say and who they can be seen speaking to. And when you look at the sort of depth of what's the intention of this work, it begins with a policy exchange paper called Extremism Rebellion that came out in 2019. I was named in it, so was everybody else who started XR. And that was a sort of a white paper on how to not lose to a popular, successful movement of non-violent civil disobedience that was inclusive, that was going to actually be able to make things change. Because if you've got a successful non-violent strategy, often, if you've done it right, you either win because they hit you, or you win because they choose not to hit you. but it's like it's a strategic, endeavour, and they've got moves. So like, the climate denial space for years would say we don't need to fight the scientists just on what they're saying. We need to destroy their personhood. We need to, damage their reputation so that no one listens to them at all, right? So you get ClimateGate, you get hacked emails, you get, but they can't be trusted, can they? Oh, and they can't defend themselves because they're geeks, and when they go on the news, they're not actually very fucking good spokespeople. So, it's easy to attack certain points where, science is a weakness, scientists have been a weakness, blah, blah, blah. Activists now have had the same treatment, which is like, don't argue with what they're saying because they're so fucking right that we do have to stop oil. Actually, just other them out of existence so that they can't have a political life, so they can't be seen in public. And, the latest thing from Lord Wolney was like, actually, we should prescribe Palestine action and just stop oil in the same way that you do for terrorists. But obviously, we won't really make them terrorists. We'll make a new categorization that means you're not really a terrorist, but you'll just get treated the same. So you can't fundraise, you can't go on the media, you can't be seen, you can't have a political and a public life. And that, those strategies have been extremely successful. And I would say that having such a big movement and such a lot of popular support for the policies at the same time as this toxic kind of vilification of the people who are willing to like go to prison to try and save your fucking kids, that has had an effect on real politics as well as on the sort of movement landscape.
Definitely. And I think it's really interesting that it's very interesting you talk about the media in this sense, because, we might have a different government. As Dale says, we do have a very different government. I mean, I think we've all been through PDST, actually. It's taken me a few weeks to realise I have a government that might actually want to do something good for me rather than screw me. So, that sort of, takes time to think about that. So we have a government whose heart is in the right place. But we do still have the media that hasn't changed. We still have Tufton Street. We still have all those, oil lobbies. So I suppose that doesn't necessarily disappear, does it, really? Christopher, what do you think? I mean, it's still there.
I don't feel like the government has their heart in the right place. I have a similar level of distrust of this government than I do the previous one, personally.
All right.
I sometimes feel like there's like a self-perpetuating cycle, so the environment wasn't like up for debate so much in the elections. But like the media don't talk about it, politicians don't talk about it, and therefore, our cultural consciousness isn't completely focused on it. We focus so much on what the media are focusing on, and it's really hard to go against that. So I think that is just really a massive reason why it hasn't been being such a sort of prevalent aspect of the campaigns. I guess also probably because both sides don't really have any too much intention to really tackle it, or possibly feel like it's such a polarizing space, which is really sad. And I think one of the things that I worry about is how polarized things feel within the environmental movement. How much, I'm doing it now. How much of a them and us kind of narrative there is, and I think that is something that I want to work on within myself to unpick, but that we also need to do it collectively as well.
Yeah, right. But it is strange when you would think that would be the way to appeal to young people, which is sort of strange. But I suppose the other thing that does worry me is the whole growth strategy seems to be very GDP based, and growth that isn't growth, which is about sustainability, is very dangerous. And if you're expecting that to rescue you, that can make the system even worse. I would like to get back onto this cognitive dissonance point, because we were all a bit stunned, particularly me, when you got down to it being two very simple things, and then we realised that we are contributing to the problem by not being plant-based. But you do have a stunningly simple message, Dale, which you've got here, that you've distilled down and doing something about it. Do you think it's cultural? I mean, when you go into primary schools, I'm just trying to think how you get to a younger generation with this. Is it you almost give up on the sort of older generations, but younger generations, do they get it when you're talking to them?
I think kids generally, younger people generally are more open to new ideas than older people. I think that's a truism probably. Our work with schools is partly about reaching the upcoming generations and not just for, let's say, our benefit, because that's what we want to see happen in the world, but for their benefit, because they will inherit this world that we're creating right now. If they're not being taught about the climate crisis and that kind of stuff, sustainability generally right now, when they become adults and they inherit this world, they're not going to be able to operate in it so effectively. So I think that's a thing. But I think older people are also open to change. I did a talk yesterday on the stage over in the Arboretum, and a guy came up to me afterwards and he said, I was here last year for the first time, I heard you speak, and I've become plant-based since then. And I've had a couple of conversations like that. The key, I think, is getting information to people. I think that's really important, and I've spent a lot of my time doing that. I firmly believe that if we've done it at Forest Green, our football club, we took sustainability into the world of football. Everybody said it wouldn't happen. It couldn't work because football fans wouldn't accept it. We went in there, we showed football fans what the situation was in energy, transport and food. We showed them how it related to their own personal lives. We didn't preach or tell them what to do, we just showed them what we were doing. And our fans have changed how they live. They've become veggie and vegan, they've got solar panels, electric cars, the whole 9 yards. It's incredible.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and that's shown us that there is no audience we can't reach with a communicative message if we show them what the problems are and what they can do about it. And for me, the cow in the room is the biggest one. That the show of hands in this tent genuinely shocked me. I thought I'd be in an audience of more plant-eating people. And I know if I asked you, you'd all put your hands up and say you care about the climate and you care about the decline in wildlife. And we can talk all day about non-violent protest, but I would like to see a non-violent food system, actually. And we have to... We, all of us, have to walk the walk. Every day, we choose to spend money on the 3 big areas of life that are driving all of the crises we face, energy, transport, and food. We can choose better, but the single biggest, easiest choice that we can all make is to stop eating animals. And here's some statistics for you. Farming takes up 75% of our entire country. We have an inefficient system whereby we grow plants to feed animals to feed people. The worst example is a cow. We put 10 kilograms of good quality plant protein into a cow to get 1 kilogram back out. It's quite incredible. But the reason we have a massive decline of wildlife in our country is because we've taken all of the land to grow plants to feed animals to feed people. And if the entire nation was plant-based tomorrow, we could give back 75% of all that farmland, which is 50% of our entire country. And that's how we get nature back and take out probably the second biggest contributor to the climate crisis, which is animal agriculture. And that's why I call it the cow in the room.
No, that's very, very strong message, and something I think we all need to really confront ourselves. But I was also thinking, Christabel, that the example of the football team would be brilliant for Earth, wouldn't it? You must get together and get that on the platform, because that's a fantastic example. So, building on this, because I think you've been very clear about our own sense of personal responsibility here. I am interested, though, Claire, in whether, because we've taken the focus a bit on politicians, that's fine, but there are some structural issues here. We've been talking about GDP, we've been talking about politics. I'm quite interested to hear about sort of some of the assemblies and how you've been using that, because I see they're being used in a local sense as well. Can you give us a bit of a flavour of what's going on and what could go on with assemblies?
Yeah, well, so there's been a massive kind of upsurge in interest and activity in the sort of deliberative democracy space. I think some in the academic space they call it like the deliberative wave. There's lots and lots of places where people have done different types of citizens' assemblies and other ways of having sort of local popular assemblies or things that people, you know, show up to rather than get selected for. It's like the key difference between like the different ways of doing it. But essentially, you know, getting people together to think about really difficult things and to maybe find good ways to disagree but find a way forward that they can all bear feels to me like it has to be a crucial part of deciding, you know, what we're going to do going forwards, because at the moment you've got this sort of paradox of huge support for climate action, a Tory party making it into a political wedge, which is just a piss take, and that's going to be Rishi Sunak's like humiliating, despicable legacy of like, what did he do? Well, he just did something really fucking pointless and then lost. So, but I think, you know, you need, for me anyway, to be able to imagine new ways of doing things when you have a set of unprecedented circumstances, a political system that's hundreds of years old, and a lack of access, a lack of agency, and a massive lack of trust. You know, so I met recently this phenomenal person called Audrey Tang. If you've never heard of her, go and look her up. She's a Taiwanese digital minister who brought in loads of innovation into politics in Taiwan. And loads of it was about access, agency, giving people real-time data, building up trust. And she used this phrase for governments: give no trust, get no trust. The thing is, if a government distrusts the public, then they're not going to get any trust back. And you're in a sort of stuck in a cycle that's going in one direction only. And if I think about what's really needed in terms of like the solidarity across society to be able to deal with something that is so all-encompassing as the breakdown of the living world and the collapse of our climate, you know, we need as much innovation and social technology that pulls people together as we can possibly get. And what you hear from people who work on citizens' assemblies, particularly in the sort of professional space, is so often like, these people came together and one of them was a Trump guy and one of them was and they've all thought they'd hate each other, and then by the end of spending weekend after weekend after weekend deliberating and trying to solve something quite difficult together, they don't have to love each other, although sometimes they do. They fall completely in love with each other as human beings, and then they're devastated by the fact that they don't get to see each other anymore because perhaps they've been brought together from all corners of a country. But you know, there's a level of respect and a depth of being able to see the humanity in another person when you stop worrying only about what they think, but you become interested in why they think it. And for me, that's really important. It's like, it's not just because it's more fair, because there's more ordinary people in a room making decisions and it feels more democratic. It's also because the way that you engineer those spaces is in order that people can have a different experience that's not just a debate over an old box.
Sorry, I didn't mean to butt in too much, but we had Jamie coming and talking about Global Assembly a couple of years ago, and we did our festival in Notting Hill, and it was phenomenal, actually. And one thing, we want to try and do one next year here, so we will need a bit of your help just to make sure we're doing something of worth.
Yeah.
But we'd really like to do a citizen assembly here. So,
good.
Yeah, great. So I think what we'll try and do is work with WOMAD so people can sort of find out about it and get to know about it beforehand. But I think it's fantastic what you're doing on those. Anyone who hasn't really looked at citizens' assemblies, please, where can they go to find out a bit more information about them?
Well, you can find out quite a lot of information about citizens' assemblies on the Extinction Rebellion website. Yeah. There used to be some really good resources on there. I don't manage it anymore, but I think they're still there. The project I'm working on is called the Humanity Project, and that's self-organised assemblies. So it's a different model, but it's trying to encourage communities to come together, particularly with... There's a few of us in the sort of core team who've been across cost of living issues, racism issues, and climate issues. And what we're trying to do is work on ways to use the processes that we think are successful in bringing people together, and also creating people power in a different way, and to be able to do that in places where I don't normally have so much access. So in the Cost of Living Alliance network and in the Black and Asian communities, places where, especially because we've been so othered, there's people feel like the climate's not their issue, or it's for someone who looks like me, it's really not for them. So the Humanity Project is hopefully where we're going to start to build on from September onwards in that way. So
I want to talk a little bit more about Earthed, which is what you're doing. it's quite easy to find out about it. How do we find out about Earthed?
Yeah, go online to earth.co, and we just made it and a membership freely accessible for those who need. So you can go on and then access over 20 different courses, all in bite-sized classes, all taught by some of the world's best nature leaders, and all totally focus on citizen-led solutions.
It is, and I shouldn't say it, but it does blow away TEDx, actually. But there we anyway, it's brilliant. And Dale, we're going to do some questions, but I just want to make sure everybody knows who each other and what to do next. You've got Green Machine, a book out here, haven't you? I think...
It's called Manifesto, the Battle for Green Britain. Yep.
Green Britain, that's right. Sorry, I'm getting a bit tired. But Manifesto about Green Britain. It's over at Mr. B's bookshop. After this, I think you're going to do a bit of signing.
Yeah, that's right. I'm popping over there to do that.
Great. So we got all the ads out the way for everybody. So now we can do some questions. So we've thrown quite a lot at you. I think Rebecca's going to run around and do some questions. I might even jump off the platform and help. So where are we going to start? I think the lady here in the pink be a great place to start.
Thank you. How long do you think it will be before the Labour government is captured to some extent by the likes of the 55 Tufton Street secret think tanks and other lobby groups, particularly in respect to their influence on oil and gas?
Claire, I think perhaps you should start that one off because you probably know more about this than anyone else, really.
Well, it's a good question. There was a big piece, wasn't there, recently about the sort of extent of the lobbying influence on the Labour Party, like how much lobbying has already taken place, how lots of people... I mean, I've spoken to someone who's part of the Labour Party before who basically said to me, no, the Labour Party's not actually designed to be a vehicle for socialism. It's designed to be a vehicle to sort of be a bit left, but really to placate the establishment, and that's its sort of purpose, if you like, and the Corbyn moment was a bit of a anomaly. I don't know whether that's correct, but that's, you know, a member of the party who's told me that. So I don't anticipate that there's going to be a kind of sudden out of influence on those kinds of think tanks. At the same time, it's very hard to imagine a government who actually want to look at real things in the real world and say that they are there, which is basically not what we've had for 15 years. We've had people in charge who I've been saying, like, they probably think that if they close their eyes, they go invisible. Like, I mean, they've just been so disinterested in reality that, you know, anything was fucking possible, basically, you know. So I think now there's going to be a potential for a mood that holds people more to an account based on facts that we can all agree on, rather than, you know, living in a sort of unhinged, made-up, sort of mad Tory world, which isn't actually very conservative at all. It's just a shit show. So that's all I can say, really. I don't know how the connections between Tufton Street and Starmer go, but I suspect they're still...
We'll be keeping an eye on it.
Got plenty of access. Do you know what I mean?
Don't worry, we'll be keeping an eye on it. But thank you very much. Dale, you seem probably the most hopeful of the three people here about the Starmer government.
So what I'm feeling here today, listening to the panel and to the reaction of the audience, actually, is cynicism with politics. And I understand it. You know, 14 years of Tories has done that to us. But we have a brand new government. And if you look at what they've already done and what they've said they're going to do, instead of holding on to this kind of this history that we have and interpreting the future based on that, interpret it based on what Labour have said, 100% green electricity in 5 years' time, right? That's an incredibly ambitious project. I'm a very optimistic person, and I think that will be difficult to achieve, but I think it's a great target to have. We've got energy independence enshrined in law already. They've formed Great British Energy, a publicly owned energy company. Just 3 weeks into government, they're making amazing big changes. There's more to come. I say there's no chance that Tufton Street and the fossil fuel lobbyists capture Keir Starmer and his government. No chance at all. They see the opportunity of the green economy and they're seizing it.
Dale, what about the grid, though? I understand the grid might take more than 5 years to really sort out, so it can accept all the, particularly sort of generation from communities and individuals and that sort of thing.
No, the big grid problem is for the big offshore wind projects, and this is where we need new pylons. And Keir Starmer said he will face down NIMBYs in the countryside over pylons and over windmills. But you're right to focus on the 5 years. We won't see a lot of outcome from those changes in the first cycle or this next cycle of government. But the unbanning of onshore wind and the easing the path for solar will make a difference. We can build an onshore wind project in about 12 months from scratch now that it's been unbanned. We'll see that start to happen, start to bring bills down. And I think that's super important. Most people in our country care about the cost of living, how they're going to pay their bills and all that kind of stuff. And our approach, mine and my company's approach now to the environment issue is not to argue about polar caps and ice bears and climate change, but argue about jobs and GDP growth, because this is what the green economy can give us, and this affects most people, and this is how we could sustain a second and third-term Labour government, I hope.
Do you think Biden did a good job on that? He seemed to put a lot of money, didn't he? Was it $3 trillion? And
I think
I
think he did an amazing job,
stuff,
except with the name, the IRA.
Yeah.
But I think it's amazing. And it's had a really big impact in Republican states like Texas. They felt an enormous benefit from the growth of solar and wind there, which the Republican politicians are owning. They're putting their arms around it and saying, we did this, but it's actually Biden that did that. And when right-wing politicians own environment moves like that, like
doing
green
something
energy,
right.
well, we're on the path, aren't we? We can't lose.
But I think the thing I would say, though, to the lady who asked questions, the bit I'm worried about is the culture wars won't go away. So it's not so much the politicians being captured, it's social media and media continuing to capture us and feed us these sort of false narratives. That's my personal concern. But what do you think, Christopher?
Pass on this question.
Pass on this question. Good, excellent. Perhaps this young lady here.
Thank you very much for your perspectives. I'm going to stand up. The binary has been named a few times, human versus nature, or us versus the extreme right, or us versus the government. And I guess I'm really curious about your opinions on how do we dissolve the binary. Also shows up in gender quite a lot. And specifically, what is the role of art and culture to do that? Thank you.
Very good. Christopher, is that something you'd like to talk about?
It's a space that I'm fascinated by, and me and my sister, we started Earth, but we also run another company called Advire, and the point of Advire is to embrace a world of like true complexity. Advire actually means non-dualism, and for me, I can only speak personally. A practice that I've been doing for the past few years is to try and, when I'm listening to an opinion that I don't agree with, to just listen to it and accept that actually, one, I don't need to be right over that opinion, and it's possible for there to be many, many different truths. So previously someone said like that they see the solutions as very simple, and I do too in one way, but I also see what is being called for through the environmental movement is a true embracing of complexity and allowing people to have absolutely different opinions on things and just creating more space for that. And that's what I love about the citizen assemblies, is that you're empowering people to have a voice and to hear each other and to not necessarily walk away with a shared understanding, but at least like a shared understanding of each other's perspectives. So I think it's an absolutely essential piece, because I think often what's happening is that we're just going into complete shutdown mode when we're hearing something that we find challenging to our own opinion, and that's never going to enable us to progress.
Pretty good. Very good. Claire, XR, I think, has always been very good on art and culture, but particularly art, and you've seen that as a really important part of what you're doing. It's just good to understand a little bit more about that, really.
Yeah, I think I used to be part of this group called the Space Hijackers a long time ago, and we did really stupid things in public spaces, and it was very much sort of like in that period of anti-globalization movements and stuff, but it was inspired by the Situationists, and they were a group of artists in the 60s who did absurd things in public space to sort of help people to just notice that perhaps some of the things that we adhere to as sort of rules of behaviour, or what we do, where we go, and how we behave. Perhaps some of them are actually a bit absurd, and perhaps you can sort of shake people awake by turning one space into a different space. So that's massively what we did at the beginning of XR. We parked a boat in Oxford Circus out of water, put a DJ on it, and said, this is what we're going to do. And the people attached to the bottom became called the Barnacles. And you had a sort of a set of trees that were handballed onto Waterloo Bridge, and a skate ramp and a stage. And a lot of what we did was really taking a space that you think you know, like a bridge, and turning it into a place for a different kind of purpose, and saying, this is an emergency, no one's behaving like it is, and we're gonna transform these public spaces into places of sort of ongoing resistance. And it was that, and working across the design program and all of the aesthetics that we developed with the art department was massively important sort of foundation for things to jump off from.
Captured the public's imagination, didn't it? I mean,
yeah.
it was amazing. It's interesting too, the Situationists, because actually Vivian Westwood and Malcolm McLaren, they were great believers in Situationists, and they created punk out of it. So it's very, very strong. Yeah.
But I think at the moment I've been working on something called Hard Art, which is another thing people could look up, and it's a group of us who've done a lot of creative work in the movements, also activists, also artists. Been supported by Brian Eno, which is very helpful, because when he invites people to a studio, they come more likely than if I just send them an email and say, we'd really like you to come and hang out with us. But we've been building this like network of, I guess, people who make culture, faith leaders, academics, economists, all sorts of different people to get a sort of discipline diversity and build a network strategically so that it can be the sort of cultural support for the changes that we think that we need to see in our society. And I'm very interested in how we can do this. We can do really interesting things with people who come from different discipline spaces, which creates potential for things to happen that have never previously happened because those people weren't meeting. And so when I think about the climate, I think about the appalling economics that was done by William Nordhaus, which basically said it would be better for the economy to go to 3 degrees or more of global warming, because one of his reasons was like most economic activity happens indoors, therefore it's not going to be affected by the climate crisis, right? So this person won a prize for this. It's been like, this is why the pension sector is fucked, because they've based all of their analysis on really shit work by an idiot who won a prize for doing something completely disingenuous and misusing the science. If his homework had been marked by the scientists, by creatives, by people with different disciplines, they would have looked at it and said, mate, your work is a load of shit. But they didn't, because everyone left the economists to do the economist thing. They left the scientists to do the science thing. They left the risk people over there and didn't even talk to them, as far as I can tell. And actually what they should have been doing is pulling people together across different disciplines and different lenses, so that they could have a more intelligent view. And I think there's something really exciting about doing that in the cultural space, to really interrogate the difficulties that we're facing, the complexities, and do it with a load of artists who'll have like stupid ideas that might turn out to just be like the best ideas ever, because sometimes your stupidest idea that you have in a rush, in a creative sense, is the best fucking idea ever.
Brilliant. Dale, I get the feeling that... Sorry, that's just... Dale, I get the feeling that, you're not so bothered about all these people opposing each other. I might be characterising you wrong, but I get the sense that you've got your own personal mission of what you're doing, which is quite straightforward. You know where you're going. And perhaps all this other stuff is slightly noise. Am I putting words into your mouth, or what do you think?
Almost and almost not. Before I get to that, I just want to say not just art, sport. Sport is a fantastic way to reach people. We're seeing that happen. Music is a fantastic way to people. Yeah. Festivals and events are a fantastic way to reach people. I want to say that we can have different opinions, and I'm absolutely up for that. We can't have different facts, and we can't have different science. Definitely. And I spend a lot of my time on right-wing radio and right-wing TV talking to people that have different facts. They think they have different facts, but what they have is wrong. And the reason I go there is partly because I want to reach an audience of unbelievers. I don't want to preach to the choir, and also partly because I want to learn what it is that they see as the obstacle to what it is that we need to do. And when I do that, I'm able to formulate the way to reach them, to communicate with them, to dispel their myths. Like in renewable energy, the top one would be, yes, but we don't have enough. To which I say, but we could power the country 20 times over just with the wind and the sun. And then they say, okay, but there's not enough land. And I say, but we need 1% of our land to do it. And then they say, okay, but it's going to cost a lot of money. And I say, we need no public money for onshore wind and solar. And there we have it.
And then what they say.
Yeah, what about China?
Brilliant. So we haven't got time, but I'm in charge. So I'm going to break the rules. I'm sorry, Rebecca. Sorry. I always allow myself to chair one panel so I can break the rules. So we're going to have one more question, all right? And I'm going to be in trouble. I would like, I don't want you to go too far, but that lady just outside the tent, she has been waving for her question all the way through. So I hope it's a good one, madam. I'm not trying to, not trying to put any pressure on you at all here.
I'm increasing my steps for this one.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Jane. I came into the talk a bit late.
Right.
So you might have dealt with this, in which case I'm very sorry. I want to know what you feel about the issue of lab-grown meat in terms of addressing the problems that you're talking about with farming, for instance.
Good question. I think we should probably start with Dale here because you're already trying to tackle this whole issue, aren't you?
Yeah, look, lab-grown meat is just something we don't need. It's an attempted technological fix for people that can't accept the fact that we have to stop eating animals. That eating animals is wrong. It's an abuse of sentient creatures. It's driving the climate crisis, and it's an abuse of our own health. And we have to accept that. Lab-grown meat will never be better for us than plants, never. And it will never be cheaper for us than plants, and it will never be better for the climate either than plants.
You're clapping, so I hope that's the right answer. Christabel, would you like to...
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would also just add that what scares me the most about things like lab-grown meat is how it plays into the hands of further corporatization and globalization of food system. And yet, like, overconsumption of meat is driving climate crisis, but so is the corporatization and industrialization of the food system, which is not efficient, which pumps chemicals into the land, which is destroying biodiversity. And so I can see why someone might think, therefore, lab-grown is going to be better, but we're still operating within the same paradigm of which is basically anti sort of small farms, locally grown food, which is very much what I believe in.
Right. Thank you very much, Christabel. Very good points. Claire?
Well, it just... The debate, if you like, about things like this it reminds me of something. I had a conversation with Gail, who's one of the other founders of XR, recently. And she'd been at this event where she met somebody who worked for a bank or something, and they said, oh, you can do these, like carbon... credits and trading and stuff. It's fantastic because they're going to start doing that with biodiversity so that you can actually deal with it on a market sense and all.
Or you can swap a dandelion for something else.
And Gail said, she basically said to this woman, the stages of grief that are sort of quite well known popular concept, the stages of grief. There's a stage called bargaining. And I think in a lot of ways, when we think through what's actually going on with people when they're saying, yeah, maybe we can't have all these animals and all these methane and all these impacts, we'll grow it in a lab. Or maybe we can put everything on the market and somehow trade it and keep everything the same. It's there's so much of the response that we see that I think we have to be very mindful of our own human sort of fallibility and capacity to bullshit ourselves and each other in the process of trying to sort of fix something. And that's, for me, why it's also been really important for our message to contain an awareness about, the direction of travel towards collapse. Because when you believe that a system is fundamentally set on self-destruction, which this one is, and that so much of it needs to change, you have to be very mindful of your own inability to take on the magnitude of what that really fucking means. Because some days I don't even think I understand what that really means, and I try really hard to pay attention to it and stare it in the face and act as if it's
Claire, I
the
think
real
this
truth.
is such an important last thought, really. Other than I would say, I think we should all try and seriously consider a plant-based diet. I honestly think we should try and do that.
You've won him over, Dale.
But I think
I love that. Thank you.
I think the other point of cognitive dissonance is to think that it's going to be okay, and somehow we don't have to think about this for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You know, this is something we've got to confront now. It's really, really important. So I want that to be the last thought. Before I ask you to clap wildly, I just want to remind you, and I want to get the name right this time because I've actually got things here. The manifesto that you put together, the Green Energy Manifesto, which is the Battle for Green Britain. Great book, and you're going to be over at Mr. B's straight after this. In fact, Dale's going to leap off the stage and go over there and sign copies for you. So please go and buy your copy. It's very important. Claire, I think we want to look at the XR website page, look at everything there in terms of assemblies, but also your human project, which I think sounds...
Yeah, Humanity Project.
Humanityproject.uk
is
brilliant.
the website.
So we must do that. And like me, you need to join Earthed, and it's very, very little money to join up. And you get lots of regular brilliant things. And I get obsessed at about 3 a.m. watching the videos, I'm afraid. So so I would really like to thank these 3 amazing people for coming on stage and tackling these issues with us. So a big round of applause, please.